The morning sun barely touched the windows of Kensington Palace as Kate Middleton sat quietly in the breakfast room, her tea growing cold in the delicate china cup. The silence felt heavy, broken only by the distant sound of staff moving carefully through the corridors. Everything had changed overnight, and the weight of what lay ahead pressed down on her shoulders like a thick winter coat she couldn't remove. William entered the room slowly, his face showing the exhaustion that comes from sleepless nights, filled with difficult phone calls and endless arrangements. His usually perfect appearance was slightly disheveled, his tie loosened, and his hair falling across his forehead in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable. He looked at Kate with eyes that held both love and worry. "The children are still sleeping," he said softly, settling into the chair across from her. "I thought we should talk before they wake up." Kate nodded, wrapping her hands around the warm cup even though she had no intention of drinking from it. The familiar routine of morning tea felt strange now, almost wrong given the circumstances. "How do we tell them?" she whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet room. William reached across the small table and placed his hand over hers. His fingers were warm and steady, but she could feel the slight tremor that betrayed his own emotional state. "We tell them the truth, as gently as we can. They loved her so much, Kate. They deserve to understand what has happened." The weight of their responsibility as parents felt enormous. George, Charlotte, and Louis had formed such a special bond with their great-grandmother. The Queen had always made time for them during family gatherings, listening to their stories with genuine interest and teaching them about duty, kindness, and what it meant to serve others. Now they would have to learn about loss in a way no child should have to experience. Kate's eyes filled with tears as she remembered the last time they had all been together. It was just 3 weeks ago at Balmoral, where the Queen had insisted on joining them for a picnic despite the chilly Scottish weather. She had wrapped herself in her favorite tartan shawl and sat on the blanket with the children, laughing as Louis tried to catch butterflies and listening patiently as Charlotte explained her latest school project. She was so proud of them, Kate said, her voice breaking slightly. "Do you remember how she smiled when George helped serve the sandwiches? She said he was becoming quite the little gentleman." William's own eyes grew misty as he recalled that afternoon. "She told me privately that Charlotte reminds her of herself at that age, so determined and curious about everything." He paused, swallowing hard. Louis made her laugh so much that day. She said his joy was infectious. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of small footsteps in the hallway. George appeared in the doorway, his dark hair sticking up in all directions and his pajamas wrinkled from sleep. He looked between his parents with the intuitive understanding that children possess, sensing immediately that something was different. "Mummy? Papa? Why do you both look sad?" George asked, his young voice filled with concern that seemed too mature for his years. Kate and William exchanged a look that spoke volumes about the difficulty of the moment they were facing. William stood and walked to his eldest son, kneeling down to be at eye level with him. "Come sit with us, George," William said gently. "We need to talk to you about something very important." As George climbed onto Kate's lap, Charlotte and Louis appeared, drawn by their older brother's movement, and perhaps by the same instinct that had alerted George to the change in atmosphere. Charlotte, always observant, immediately noticed her mother's red-rimmed eyes. "Mummy, have you been crying?" Charlotte asked, with the directness that only children possess. Kate pulled all 3 children close, feeling William's steadying presence beside them. The morning light was growing stronger now, casting long shadows across the room and highlighting the family portraits that lined the walls. Generations of royals looked down at them, including several pictures of the Queen herself, captured in moments of joy and celebration. "Children," William began, his voice steady despite the emotion clearly visible on his face. "We have some very sad news to share with you. Great-Granny has gone to heaven." The silence that followed was deafening. Louis, at 4 years old, didn't fully understand what this meant, but George and Charlotte grasped the finality of the words immediately. Charlotte's lower lip began to tremble, while George sat very still, processing the information with a seriousness that broke his parents' hearts. "But we were supposed to see her next week," George said quietly, his logical mind trying to make sense of something that defied all logic. She promised to show me her stamp collection. Kate's tears flowed freely now as she held her children tighter. I know, sweetheart. Great-Granny wanted to see you all again, too. She loved you so very much. Charlotte buried her face against Kate's shoulder, her small body shaking with sobs. Will we ever see her again? She asked, her voice muffled by tears and fabric. Not in the way we're used to, William explained gently. But Great-Granny will always be with us in our hearts and in our memories. Every time we think of her smile or remember one of her stories, she's still with us. Louis looked up at his father with wide, confused eyes. Is Great-Granny sleeping like Grandpa Philip? The mention of Prince Philip, who had passed away 2 years earlier, added another layer of complexity to the conversation. William nodded slowly. Yes, Louis. Great-Granny has gone to be with Grandpa Philip. They're together again now. Kate found herself thinking about how the Queen had never quite been the same after losing her husband of more than 70 years. There had been a sadness in her eyes during recent visits, a weariness that spoke of someone who had carried tremendous responsibility for far too long. Perhaps, in some way, this was a reunion, rather than just an ending. The family sat together in the growing morning light, holding each other as they began to process the magnitude of what had happened. Outside, Kate could see the palace staff going about their duties with the same careful efficiency they always displayed. But there was something different in their movements, a reverence and solemnity that acknowledged the historical significance of this day. William's phone buzzed quietly on the table, a reminder that the outside world was waiting for them. There would be statements to make, arrangements to finalize, and a nation to address. But for these precious moments, they were simply a family sharing their grief and supporting each other through the most difficult of times. Kate looked at her husband, seeing in his eyes the same mixture of sorrow and determination that she felt in her own heart. They would get through this together, just as they had faced every challenge in their relationship. The Queen had taught them about duty and service, but she had also shown them the importance of family and the strength that comes from love. As the children's initial shock began to give way to questions and tears, Kate and William prepared themselves for the long day ahead. They would need to be strong for their family, for the country, and for each other. The palace was in mourning, but it was also preparing for what would come next. The afternoon brought a steady stream of visitors to Kensington Palace, each arrival marked by the soft closing of car doors and hushed conversations in the hallways. Kate stood by the window in the drawing room, watching as black vehicles pulled through the gates with diplomatic number plates and official seals. The world was responding to the news, and their private family grief was about to become a very public matter. William had spent most of the morning on conference calls with government officials, palace staff, and family members scattered across the globe. His voice had grown hoarse from repeated conversations about arrangements, protocols, and the countless details that needed to be managed during such a significant transition. Kate could see the strain on his face, the way his shoulders tensed each time the phone rang with another urgent matter requiring his attention. Charles had arrived an hour earlier, his own grief evident in his slower movements and the tremor in his voice when he spoke with the grandchildren. The weight of his new responsibilities was already visible, transforming him before their eyes from grieving son to monarch. Kate watched the interaction between father and son with deep concern, recognizing the burden that William would soon inherit as the new heir to the throne. The children are handling it better than I expected, Kate told William during a brief moment when they found themselves alone in the library. Charlotte asked if she could write a letter to Great-Granny, even though she knows she can't send it. William managed a small smile at this news. That sounds like something the Queen would have encouraged. She always believed in the power of written words. He paused, running his hands through his hair. The Prime Minister called again. The state funeral will be in 10 days. They're expecting representatives from every Commonwealth nation, plus world leaders from across the globe. Kate felt a familiar flutter of anxiety at the mention of such a massive public event. She had grown comfortable with royal duties over the years, but the idea of being at the center of such an enormous gathering, with the entire world watching, still made her nervous. Will we have any private time to say goodbye? She asked quietly. There will be a family service before the state funeral, William assured her, reaching for her hand. Just us, the close family. We'll have our chance to remember her as Granny, not as the Queen. The distinction was important to both of them. Throughout their relationship, Kate had been privileged to see Elizabeth not just as a monarch, but as a grandmother who worried about her family, who had strong opinions about everything from horse racing to television programs, and who could be surprisingly funny when the cameras weren't rolling. Those private moments felt even more precious now. A gentle knock at the library door interrupted their conversation. One of the Queen's ladies in waiting, Lady Susan, entered with red-rimmed eyes and a small wooden box in her hands. "Your Royal Highnesses," she said softly. Her late Majesty left specific instructions about some personal items she wanted distributed to family members. She asked me to give you this personally. Kate's breath caught as she recognized the box. It had sat on the Queen's writing desk at Windsor Castle, and Kate had noticed it during their private audiences over the years. William accepted it with reverent hands, his own eyes filling with tears. She recorded a video message for each family member. Lady Susan continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yours is in the box, along with some other things she wanted you to have. She made these recordings just 2 weeks ago, almost as if she knew." The thought hung in the air. Unfinished but understood. The Queen had always possessed an uncanny awareness of timing and preparation. Even in her final weeks, she had been thinking of others, making sure her family would have something personal from her to treasure. After Lady Susan left, Kate and William sat together on the small sofa. The box between them, like a bridge, connecting them to the woman they had lost. William opened it carefully, revealing a small digital tablet. An envelope, with their names written in the Queen's distinctive handwriting, and several small, wrapped packages. "Should we watch it now?" Kate asked, though part of her wasn't sure she was emotionally prepared for what they might see. William nodded, his hands slightly shaking as he turned on the device. The screen came to life, showing a familiar sitting room in Windsor Castle. The Queen appeared, wearing a simple blue cardigan and her favorite pearl necklace. She looked directly into the camera, with the same steady gaze that had comforted the nation for decades. "My dear William and Catherine," her voice began, clear and strong despite her recent frailty. "If you are watching this, then I have gone to join Philip, and you are facing one of the most difficult periods of your lives." Kate covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her face at the sound of that beloved voice, speaking directly to them from beyond their reach. "I want you to know how proud I have been of both of you." The Queen continued, "William, you have grown into the man I always knew you could be. Your father raised you well, despite the challenges you all faced. You understand duty, but more importantly, you understand love." William wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, his composure cracking at his grandmother's words of affirmation. "Catherine, my dear, you have been such a gift to our family. When William first brought you to meet me, I saw immediately why he loved you so much. You have brought joy and normalcy to his life in ways that I never could. You have given him the family he always dreamed of. And you have supported him through every challenge with grace and wisdom." Kate felt William's hand squeeze hers as they listened to words of acceptance and love that meant more to her than any title or honor ever could. "The path ahead will not be easy," the Queen's recorded message continued. "There will be times when the weight of duty feels overwhelming, when the scrutiny becomes too much, when you question whether you're strong enough for what lies ahead. I want you to remember that you don't have to carry these burdens alone. Lean on each other. Support each other. Love each other through the difficult times." The recording showed the Queen pausing, looking down at her hands folded in her lap before looking back up at the camera with renewed intensity. "Most importantly, never forget that your first duty is to each other and to your children. George, Charlotte, and Louis are the future of this institution, but they are your children first. Protect their childhood. Let them know they are loved unconditionally. Help them understand that while they have responsibilities to the nation, they also have the right to happiness." As the message continued, Kate found herself marveling at the Queen's foresight and wisdom. Even in what must have been her final weeks, she had been thinking not just about the immediate aftermath of her passing, but about the long-term well-being of her family and the institution they would inherit. "I have lived through many changes in my long reign," the Queen said, her voice taking on a reflective tone. "I have seen the monarchy adapt and evolve with the times, and I have confidence that it will continue to do so under Charles's leadership, and eventually under yours, William. Trust your instincts. Listen to wise counsel. Remember that serving others is the highest calling." The recording was nearing its end, and Kate could see the emotion building in the Queen's eyes. "I want you both to know that I will be watching over you, just as I know Philip watches over me. Take care of each other. Take care of your beautiful children, and remember that love is the strongest foundation for any life, whether royal or common." The screen went dark, leaving Kate and William in tears but also filled with a sense of peace they hadn't felt since receiving the devastating news. The Queen's final gift to them wasn't jewelry or artifacts, but her blessing and her confidence in their ability to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the palace grounds. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities and difficult decisions. But for now, they held each other in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the love and wisdom of a woman whose legacy would guide them for the rest of their lives. The day of the funeral dawned gray and solemn, with a gentle mist hanging over London like a soft veil of mourning. Kate stood before her bedroom mirror, adjusting the simple black dress she had chosen for this most difficult of days. Her hands trembled slightly as she fastened the pearl earrings that had been a wedding gift from the Queen, their familiar weight against her neck, a comforting reminder of happier times. William emerged from his dressing room, resplendent but somber in his military dress uniform. The medals and decorations that had once seemed like symbols of honor and tradition now felt heavy with the responsibility they represented. He caught Kate's eye in the mirror, and they shared a moment of silent understanding about the magnitude of what lay ahead. "Are you ready?" he asked softly, though they both knew that no one could ever be truly ready for something like this. Kate nodded, taking one last look at herself in the mirror. She had been part of the royal family for over a decade, but today felt different. Today marked the end of one era and the beginning of another, and she could feel the weight of history settling around her shoulders like a ceremonial cloak. The children had already been taken to Westminster Abbey by their nanny, along with other family members who would help them through the service. Kate's heart ached, thinking about George, Charlotte, and Louis sitting in those ancient pews, trying to understand why the entire world was saying goodbye to their beloved great-grandmother. They had practiced walking slowly and sitting quietly, but no amount of preparation could ready them for the emotion of the day. The drive to Westminster Abbey was surreal. London's streets, usually bustling with traffic and activity, were lined with thousands of people standing in respectful silence. Many held flowers, others simply stood with their hands clasped, all united in their desire to pay their final respects to the woman who had been their queen for so many decades. Kate watched through the car window as people of all ages wiped away tears, their faces reflecting the same grief she felt in her own heart. "Look at them all," Kate whispered to William as they passed a group of schoolchildren holding hand-drawn pictures of the Queen. "She meant so much to so many people." William followed her gaze, his own eyes filling with tears at the sight of his grandmother's devoted subjects. "She would have been touched by this," he said quietly. She never fully understood how much love people had for her. Westminster Abbey loomed ahead of them, its ancient stones seeming to absorb the solemnity of the occasion. World leaders, heads of state, and representatives from every corner of the Commonwealth had gathered to honor the Queen's extraordinary life of service. The sight of so many flags at half-mast, so many uniforms and formal dress clothes, drove home the international significance of what was happening. As they entered the Abbey, Kate was struck by the overwhelming sense of history contained within those walls. Kings and queens had been crowned here, married here, mourned here, for nearly 1,000 years. The Queen herself had been crowned in this very place as a young woman of 25, and now she would be honored here one final time. The family gathered in the small anteroom before the service, a private moment before the public ceremony began. Charles looked every inch the king now, his bearing transformed by the weight of his new role. But Kate could still see the grieving son beneath the ceremonial facade. Camilla stood beside him, offering quiet support with her presence. Anne, Andrew, and Edward clustered together with their own families, all united in their shared loss. The children sat quietly between Kate and William, their faces solemn as they absorbed the atmosphere around them. George, now 10 years old, seemed to understand the historical importance of the day, his posture straight and his expression serious beyond his years. Charlotte held Kate's hand tightly, while Louis leaned against his father's side, occasionally whispering questions that William answered with gentle patience. When the time came to enter the abbey proper, Kate felt her breath catch at the sight that greeted them. Nearly 2,000 people filled every pew, their faces turned toward the family with expressions of sympathy and respect. The Queen's coffin, draped in the royal standard and topped with the imperial state crown, sat before the altar surrounded by the most beautiful flowers Kate had ever seen. The service itself was a masterpiece of both grandeur and intimacy. The Archbishop of Canterbury spoke eloquently about the Queen's unwavering faith and dedication to service, while readings from scripture and hymns that had been favorites of the Queen filled the ancient space with both sorrow and hope. Kate found herself thinking about all the private moments she had shared with the Queen, the quiet conversations over tea, the gentle advice about motherhood and marriage, the way the Queen's face lit up when the children entered the room. When they sang, "The Lord is my shepherd," one of the Queen's most beloved hymns, Kate's voice caught in her throat. She could almost hear the Queen's own voice joining in, as she had done so many times during family church services at Sandringham and Balmoral. William's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining as they drew strength from each other. The most emotional moment came when the last post was played, its haunting melody echoing through the abbey and out into the streets where millions of people stood in respectful silence. Kate watched as Charlotte wiped away tears with the handkerchief Kate had given her that morning, while George stared straight ahead with the composure that reminded everyone of his great-grandmother's own dignified bearing. As the service concluded and the Queen's coffin was carried from the abbey, Kate felt a profound sense of closure mixed with anticipation for what lay ahead. The woman who had guided the monarchy for 70 years was gone, but her legacy lived on in the family she had loved so dearly and in the institution she had devoted her life to serving. The private burial service at Windsor later that day was smaller and more intimate, exactly as the Queen would have wanted it. Only close family members gathered around the grave where she would be laid to rest beside Prince Philip in the chapel they had both loved. As the coffin was lowered into the earth, Kate watched William place a small posy of flowers from the children on top, their final gift to a great-grandmother who had loved them unconditionally. That evening, back at Kensington Palace, the family gathered for a quiet dinner. The children, exhausted by the emotional weight of the day, had been put to bed early, but not before each had shared a favorite memory of their great-grandmother. George remembered her teaching him to wave properly from the balcony. Charlotte recalled the time the Queen had let her feed the corgis, and Louis simply said he would miss her hugs. Kate and William sat together in the sitting room after dinner, both still in their funeral attire but with ties loosened and shoes kicked off. The house felt different now, quieter somehow, as if it too was adjusting to a world without the Queen's steady presence. "She would have been proud of how the children behaved today," Kate said softly, leaning against William's shoulder. "She would have been proud of how you behaved today," William replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I couldn't have gotten through this without you." They sat in comfortable silence, processing the events of the day and the magnitude of what lay ahead for their family. Tomorrow they would begin the work of adapting to their new roles, of supporting Charles as he settled into his reign, of preparing their children for the increased responsibilities that would come with being closer to the throne. But tonight, they simply held each other in their grief and their love, surrounded by the memories of a remarkable woman who had shown them that duty and devotion could coexist with warmth and humanity. The palace was quiet now, but it was not empty. Love remained, legacy endured, and the future stretched ahead of them, filled with both challenges and possibilities. Outside their window, London continued its vigil, with flowers and tributes covering the palace gates as far as the eye could see. The Queen was gone, but her impact on the world would be felt for generations to come. And in the hearts of her family, especially the 3 young children who would carry her memory into the future, her spirit would live on forever.